Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to
This is Nos Odietis. This episode of Nos Odietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Odietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A sideline fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicola Dero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is going good!
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
That Porter says cheated!
You want to win? This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Welcome to another edition of Nos Odietis, sponsored by Full Pull Wines, Watson's Counter, and our subscribers. This is episode 439, and we're recording on Thursday, October 12th, 2023. I am your host, Jeremiah Shan. Joining me today is my co-host, Mark Kastner, and our engineer, Lickett. Aaron is off in Palm Springs, where I hope the weather is absolutely terrible. The Sounders close out the regular season home schedule with a 0-0 tie with the Vancouver Whitecaps. I think we can fairly say the Sounders had the better chances and certainly had more of them, but it would probably be a stretch to suggest they deserved much better than they got. Defensively, they were stout and limited a very dangerous Whitecaps opponent to just 4 shots, only one of which was from Brian White and another from Ryan Gauld. Offensively, though, it was a lot of half chances without too many clear-cut ones. Their best chance didn't even count as a shot, as a Leo Chu cross went just under the foot of Jordan Morris at the near post. Otherwise, their best look was toward the end of the match when Yohei Takaoka dove to his right to keep out a Christian Roldan header. The point was good enough to keep the Sounders in third place, but they'll likely need some sort of result in their season finale against St. Louis to maintain home field advantage in the first round. It also closed the books on what is now officially their worst ever home record over the course of a season, albeit one in which they allowed just 0.65 goals per game, which is the fewest they've ever allowed. Given all this, Mark, what do you make of where the Sounders sit going into the final week of the season?
As we kind of talked about on the last show, I think it's really hard to be anything other than like whelmed by the whole experience.
Yeah, whelmed is a good way of putting it.
It could be so much worse. It could just be awful like it was last season. I think the ship sailed a long time ago on it kind of being a, potentially special regular season, but they're pretty poised to be able to kind of do something if they're able to do something, which I feel like has just been kind of the thing I've been saying about this team for the last 3 months. But
yeah,
I think they've done if we're kind of doing like the rose and thorn conversation, the rose that they deserve or the carnation, I should say. Is they kind of like girded their loins, so to speak, and and
they pulled it together.
Yeah, and they did.
Because the season did feel like it was falling apart. Go ahead.
And they just deserve a lot of credit for it largely being the same team that experienced the season falling apart last year, with, different availabilities and injuries and such. But they did kind of apply the tourniquet. And that, I don't know how many more analogies I can give you, but that's, a positive. The negative is they're still kind of boring, and that's fine. But like being a boring team in the playoffs is okay. We've experienced that before, and that's totally fine. I still don't know if they're like a good team, but I definitely know nobody else in the West is a good team. So that's okay.
Yeah, I think from the perspective of if you had told me in April that this is where we would be, I'd be disappointed, right? But the reality is we had 5 months of 5 months of living through some pretty bad, or 4 or 5 months of living through some pretty bad soccer to get us sort of like mentally ready for where we are now. And from that perspective, it's good. And we talked about this last week, but the Sounders never dipped below fourth in the West. But there was a stretch there where they lost on the road to San Jose, then they came home and they tied Dallas, and then they lost back-to-back Leagues Cup. They got blown out in back-to-back League Cup games, and then they got kind of, and it was only 2-0, but they did get played off the park against Atlanta at home. And during that stretch, that 5-game stretch, it felt like the season was absolutely falling apart. And to your point, they did apply the tourniquet. They did keep it from falling apart. And I don't know that these last 8 games that they went unbeaten in were exactly inspiring, but they did show an ability to get results. They showed an ability to get their defense right. And they didn't score in bunches, but they did score consistently. They were shut out twice during that stretch. Both of those were 0-0 games. One of them was on the road. And so it's hard to be too frustrated with their current form or even where they are right now. If they were to, and I don't think this is it's not that hard to imagine that they'll win their season finale against St. Louis. St. Louis has, let's remind everyone, has literally nothing to play for at this point, other than maybe there might be some overall seeding. Like
they have they have the expansion team franchise points record to play for against the Sounders.
Yeah, I guess that's something. I don't know how much they like. That's not that. I would say that in terms of like ways to motivate teams, that one probably isn't real high on the. It's hard to make them feel like it's a must-win game if that's the only thing that's on the line. The Sounders, on the other hand, have very real stakes, and that's home field advantage in the first round, and seeding in the playoffs. It's not make or break for them either, but they do have real, genuine stakes to play for. And so I don't know. I don't know that St. Louis, frankly, is that bad of a matchup. If you ask me right now, where would I like to finish in the West? Fourth doesn't seem that bad, frankly, because the teams that you're going to play, if you're second, third, or fourth, I don't know that there's that big of a difference between the opponents that you're going to face. You're still going to have home field advantage. And frankly, I might rather be on the side of the bracket of St. Louis than LA, if all things being equal. So I don't know. I don't think fourth would be the end of the world. They probably need to, they might even be able to get fourth with a loss in this game. Still, I'd like them to close out on a win. I think it would just feel better emotionally. But there were some takeaways from Saturday's match that I think we should probably get into. The first of which was, and we talked about this a bit on the website. You mentioned this in your column, but it did feel like Ladero was saying goodbye to fans. There was a big tifo at the beginning of the game. Hopefully you've seen it that ECS put out. I was told that ECS had no foresight into what might be happening. They just they were aware that it could potentially be Ladero's last game. So they wanted to make sure that they sort of sent him a message recognizing his contributions. But when he came off the field, he did the double hand wave multiple times. He was in tears. His son was in tears during the post game, with the fans. It did feel like something was relevant about all that.
Yeah. After all of this kind of hit me after the fact. I wasn't really, I obviously wasn't there watching the game. So I didn't see kind of the post game stuff. I didn't see the tifo until I saw a picture of it. And obviously with kind of a centralized broadcasting crew, they're not going to have the nuance to kind of talk about things like that.
Right.
Even the most prepared analyst is probably not going to bring that up during a broadcast. And so when I sat down to kind of write my column, I was like, oh, whoa, that could be it.
Yeah.
That even playoffs aside, that could be it, Hopefully it's not. Hopefully there is at least some form of a home playoff game.
Well, they will get. They're
Yeah.
guaranteed at least one home playoff game, and I guess we should maybe mention that there's been some I think there's been some confusion around the way that the playoffs are this year. Every team that finishes 1 through 7 is guaranteed, or actually 1 through 8 is guaranteed a home playoff game in the first round, and then in the first round, it's a 3-game series and it goes home, away, home. So even if you don't have home field advantage in the first round, you still get a home game. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, the spirit of like a home game. I guess.
Yes. Well, and it's a playoff game always is going to feel different, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't really want to do your goodbyes at a playoff game.
And I guess the thing that like really kind of has caught me off guard is with what Spencer said, obviously, and kind of like the nuance of his like post-game experience on the field with fans. And I think even you mentioned like he was telling fans goodbye kind of thing.
Right.
It's a little strange that the club hasn't like put momentum behind it, and I think there's two like thoughts behind that. Like it's a little sort of cringy. It's cringy on both sides, don't get me wrong, because anything like this can be interpreted poorly, but he's the greatest ever Sounder to play for the team. The expectation is that there'll be several more home games this season. That's the expectation, because they say things like the expectation is to win MLS Cup, blah, blah,
right.
blah.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
And then there's a parade after that.
Right.
If they win. So it's like, if you do the goodbye, it's kind of like you go to a bar with a buddy, you say goodbye, and then you're actually walking to the bus stop together.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, it is sort of like that. I agree. It is kind of that way where, and I suppose it could have been handled differently. Like my suspicion is that it's already been communicated by the team or by Ladero, or maybe mutually, that this is the last year of Ladero Sounders. Now, I suppose, and maybe there's not. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe they have not had this conversation, and maybe there is a possibility. But my suspicion is that both sides are well aware that this could and likely is the end. And given that, it wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world, I suppose, for the Sounders to sort of be out in front of this. Although then you get into the whole question of, like, for instance, when I think this is the trick. What makes this tricky is that I don't think Ladero is retiring. Unlike Casey Keller, who the Sounders had a big send-off game for, he had announced, and even though they had playoff games after that, they had announced that this was going to be his last year. And so they had a big send-off for him, and it was a big event, and it was a lot of fun and all that kind of stuff. And it would have been kind of cool if the Sounders could have done that. But I don't know. I guess it's a little more weird. Maybe he didn't want it to be a big, I don't all know what's going on behind the scenes, but
the kind of like analog situation in my mind is Diego Valeri's send-off with Portland,
right,
where there was just a very kind of clear, like, he's no longer a starter, he's not the captain,
right,
he's leaving at the end of the season, they end up going to MLS Cup and losing,
right,
and then he goes and plays another season, barely. He went back to Lanús, and
I didn't even know that. That's funny.
He played like 9. Wikipedia says he played 9 games there. I don't know if they were sub appearances or starts.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So it is a very similar. I guess it is kind of vaguely similar, except for I think. Well, no. I mean, it probably was similar in that I think there was some contention here too, where it's not like Ladero has held his hand up and said, like, I would like to have a job share with Albert Rusnak.
Yeah. I mean, and you can kind of do all these things really well after the fact.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just what they're doing. And also, if we're just thinking about it from like a really practical like situation. The Sounders have put so much effort into a rebrand.
Right.
That
Yeah.
maybe they just literally don't have the manpower or the marketing power to say goodbye to their captain. Or
Yeah. I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, I guess. But I am glad that there was at least an informal chance to sort of say goodbye. And in that way, I suppose it was good. But aside from that, there were other things that happened in this game, most notably the Sounders failing to score. They generated some decent chances, like I said, and they almost eked out a win. It would have been pretty amazing if Christian Roldan had scored a stoppage time winner twice in a week, which he came very close to doing, frankly. But I don't know how much of a concern do you think it is, because that they aren't scoring ton, but it does feel like ever since Christian has come back into the team, there's cohesive attacking ideas.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned, like, on previous episodes, there's like three main concerns that have existed in the last few months for the Sounders. They can't score, they make stupid mistakes, and they don't have a clear best 11.
Yeah.
Two of those three things have been solidified, where you kind of know what your best team is, and really kind of stupid defensive mistakes are not happening anymore. Like the Dallas goal, for instance.
Right.
You can be relatively sure that a goal like that's not going to be scored, but then of course an LA Galaxy type goal can be scored, where you just have like a few small mistakes and a really good player.
Yeah, I mean that was definitely a preventable goal, but it wasn't like it wasn't a stupid goal. It was a good player making a good move, and whatever, it happens.
Yeah, and so they're not scoring, and that's obviously a concern, because you cannot. I guess in the playoffs you can technically win games without scoring, but you do at some point have to put the ball into the net, even if it's penalty kicks.
Yeah, right. Well, especially this year's playoffs, where every game's going to go to penalties if it's tied, but or at least in the first round. Anyway, go ahead.
I think they just like have like a pretty solid foundation, where like they're also no longer easy to play against, which was a criticism I had. They're classically like stout now.
Yeah, I would say that's fair.
Which is good. I think that's okay. And I think like you have to think about how few minutes this best 11 actually has together. Even
well, let me stop you there. Who do you think's in the best 11? Is it? I'm assuming. I mean, well, yeah. Who is it? Why don't you just give me your best 11?
I think the three positions the three position is who's the best left back. It's probably Nuhu.
Yeah.
Who's the best midfield partner for João Paulo? It's Joss Atencio.
Yeah.
And I guess it's actually four. Who starts at number 10? It's Rusnak. And then who starts at striker? It's Jordan Morris.
Yeah.
I think those are the four questions you have to ask yourself.
Yeah.
And those are my four answers.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that at the very least, I think there's solidity in those are the question marks, and there's basically two choices for like, and so it's like there's, I guess that in some ways that gives them some flexibility. I do think Atencio being in the starting 11 has been one of the key components of the improvement of this team.
Yeah, you're not gonna find a bigger Joss Atencio fan than myself.
Yeah, and I think that Reed Baker Whiting has sort of emerged as a legitimate, change of pace, if nothing else, at left back is a pretty big development and I think, but the biggest question mark around this team, or maybe the two biggest, because I do think Ladero and Rusnak sort of like are an interesting contrast because they play the position very differently. Like Rusnak is more likely to sort of make runs and and not necessarily need the ball at his feet so much, whereas Ladero is more of a classic 10. And I think those two things can work against different kinds of opponents. Hopefully the Sounders use it that way. But the really big question, I think, is just going to be the health and availability of Raul Ruidiaz. And I think he provides a legitimate X factor for them, potentially, even giving them some upside here, where, he's been hurt so much. He is not someone I think the Sounders can afford to rely on. But if they can even get him to be an effective player during the playoffs, that's a huge boost to them, because I know you're not obviously out at training, but every time I'm out at training and he looks healthy, he looks exactly like Raul Ruidiaz. Like today they were doing a finishing drill and it was just remarkable, the finishes that he's able to make still. And it's just like you're reminded, like, this is why they don't want to give up on him.
Right. And I think you can kind of look at playoff games differently than you can kind of look at regular season games, because even until recently, the coaching staff was trying to use regular season games to like figure out what they wanted to do.
Right.
Which might be a little unfair, but like you can see they were trying to work something out. In the last 8 games or so, they kind of have worked that out.
Yeah.
And every time, Raul was supposed to start one of those games. He couldn't start. He had to go to
Right.
loss. Like,
yeah,
all of that's kind of a setback. But in a playoff game, you can identify, we're going to do a thing for 60 or 70 minutes and then completely change the thing we do to win the game. And you can kind of like micromanage each of those 15-minute intervals until you need to, like, imagine how awesome it would feel. Stay with me because it's not going to feel awesome, but imagine how awesome it would feel when the Sounders need to win a game from the 70th minute. Let's say they're 1-0 down, and the 3 subs they can make is Reed Baker Whiting on at left back, Nico Ladero into midfield, and then Raul Ruidiaz at striker. Right. That completely changes the game.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think it gives some hope that that they can kind of figure out. And I think what allows them some of this is a defense that has legitimately regained its form. I think during that stretch that I referenced earlier, their defense was really struggling to shut teams down. And I think that even extended beyond that a little bit into this unbeaten streak. And I feel good about where the defense is right now. Jackson Reagan and Yamar are both as solid of a center back pairing as you're going to find. João Paulo, I think, very much looks like himself in terms of in the defensive midfield. And, they're a very good defensive outfit right now. And that does give them that flexibility to sort of like, if it's not working on offense, you can sort of do this like mini line change and really alter the way that you are trying to break down an opponent.
Yeah, I see a lot of similarities to the end of this season as to the end of 2019. And the Sounders were just kind of like shipping goals all summer. Chad Marshall had like suddenly retired earlier in the year. They had brought in Arriaga. They
were blowing leads, if I remember correctly, and getting very upset about it.
And they had like they had something like, I don't know, it was like 10 or 15 games straight of basically conceding.
Yeah.
And like conceding a lot of goals. Like I'm looking right here. They have a 4-1 to LAFC. They have a 3-2 to Sporting Kansas City, a bunch of 2-1 losses, a 3-0 to New York City FC, a 2-3 to Sporting Kansas City, a 3-3 with New England Revolution, a 4-3 that they ended up winning against the Galaxy. It was just like they could score a lot of goals that season. They can't this season, but they were also shipping a lot of goals that season. Right. But that team kind of like came into form right around the playoffs, solidified by Roman Torres and Kim Keehee, who you didn't think both of them would be starters earlier in the year, but they ended up being the like defensive foundation for the rest of the playoffs that ended up being really good outside of that Dallas game, which I famously had to go into the bathroom of the press box and start screaming because it was driving me crazy. But but then it like figured itself out and was the base of a really impressive playoff run. I don't know if they have like the attacking power to kind of like blow teams away like they did in the playoffs that year to do it this year. But there are a lot of similarities where we weren't sure about the team, and it kind of rounded into a team that had 3 shutouts in their final 4 games against good teams, and it worked out really well, I think.
It did work out pretty well, if you remember correctly. The other thing I think that is worth pointing out and is worth hanging a degree of your hope on is the Sounders' performance with and without Christian Roldan. And if we assume that Christian is going to be available, and at this point there's no reason not to assume that, with him starting, they averaged 1.77 goals and 2.0 points per game. Those are, right around league leading numbers. When he doesn't start, they only averaged 0.8 goals and 1.2 in the points per game. Those are very much on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of where they would be in the standings. But if, and I think we've seen that play out during the recent games where if he's on the field, they have a chance. If he's starting, they look like a much more dangerous team. And when he's not, that's a big problem. That's an issue they probably need to address in the offseason. But for now, I suppose the half glass full look on this is he's rested and he should have plenty of legs for the playoffs.
He's also motivated.
He's also very motivated. Yeah, no, exactly.
So it's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, like it's just really that simple. Like the team is a legitimate contender with him, and they're not without him. And he is healthy for now. And like, knock on wood, any superstition, obviously, and like concussions are super weird. I had to stop playing soccer because of concussions. So that's kind of like that's always kind of a scary thing, but he seems to be good. He took the time to get it right, which is great. And he seems right. And let's hope for the best in the playoffs with him. Because without him, I don't.
No, without him, there's not really any point of like giving much. Like this is barely a playoff team, let alone a contender without Christian. So I think our hopes really do revolve largely around his availability. All right, well, that's probably a good place to call this a segment. We're going to come back and talk a bit about my end of season award ballot that I published, or I should say, I published it yesterday. I'm going to have an explainer in Friday's Sounder Heart newsletter, but we'll talk about it today, and we can you can poke holes in it or whatever you want. But you're listening to Nos Arietes. Watson's Counter wants to thank everyone for their patience, but now the wait is over. Located at 6420 24th Avenue Northwest in Ballard, they've reopened in a brand new location with the same bomb-ass coffee and the same dumbass vibes. You can still expect their classics like the gochujang fried chicken sandwich and Fruity Pebbles French toast, alongside their new soft serve program and their world-class coffee. Make sure to follow them on Instagram for all the latest and greatest. Welcome back to Nos Arietes. So, all right, why don't we do it this way, Mark? I'm going to read a award. I will give you who I gave it to, and you can tell me if you think I'm an idiot. How's that sound?
Sure.
Or why I'm an idiot, more accurately. And I'll give you some explanation on each one. But so I'm just going to go through the ballot as it's presented. I'm not going to go through assistants and all that. Referees and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to focus on the stuff people care about. MLS Defender of the Year. I went with the Earthquakes Rodriguez. And I'll be totally honest. If I was just going off of my memory of how team players did, I don't know that I would have picked him. But going through the stats, I kind of like this pick. He does really well in a lot of the sort of advanced metrics. And he does well in some of the non-advanced metrics, some of the more basic stats, but it might be I can talk myself a couple different ways into this one. Robin Janssen, also from Orlando City, was another one that I considered. Steven Moreira from Columbus was another one that I considered. Who are some of the other ones? Walker Zimmerman worked his way in there. Jackson Reagan, I thought, we'll get into this later, would have been my pick from the Sounders. He wasn't even nominated. The two Sounders nominees were Yamar and Nuhu. I think there's maybe a case to be made from that list that Yamar is, but yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
I've been really impressed by him this season, and I'm gonna be like honest. I've probably watched one non-Sounders Earthquake game, so I've got a sample size of like maybe 3 full matches, and
yeah,
I'm and that's probably the caveat that's going to exist throughout this conversation. But
yeah, and to be fair, I fall in the same boat a little bit. I don't watch a ton of non-Sounders,
but he's good. He's also young for a central defender. He's only like 26 basically, and it's his first full season as a starter. I think he came into the Earthquakes last season, and they're also a team that like at times plays like a suicidal high line, because that's just Luchi Gonzalez's thing. It's different than previous Earthquake managers who have played kind of suicidal defensive setups, but I think he's great. Like, I would like for him to be on the Sounders, and for my criteria for Defender of the Year, I think that's perfectly fine. I think the Orlando guy's probably going to win it.
That's Janssen.
Just because he kind of seems to have the classic like resume for this type of award, and which is fine. Some like Orlando, really good team, needs to have a reason to be really good central defender. He gets the award. That's the equation.
That is sort of the equation this oftentimes plays out. So goalkeeper of the year, I think, has a few decent candidates. I went with Roman Berkey. What I like, I sort of look at goalkeeper of the year sort of as sort of an MVP-esque award, which is to say that it's not just the guy with the best numbers. It's someone that has a influence over their team. But really, when you dig into Berkey's numbers, they are pretty impressive. He had the second best goals allowed to expected goals allowed stat. The number one was Daniel from Earthquakes, is another player who I considered. But what I really liked about Berkey was that he's involved in not just shot stopping, but he was a key part of their distribution. He also does a lot of work coming off of his line. I think I do think he has a legitimate case for being in the MVP consideration. I don't think he has a legitimate case to actually win, but he's worth someone discussing.
I think it should be Stefan Fry.
Okay. I'm willing to hear you out on it.
He's never won the award before.
Yeah, that's a good reason. It is.
And we have one more game left this season as of recording.
Yeah.
The last time the Sounders played St. Louis, Berkey shipped 3 goals. He's going to ship 3 or more this time. Of course, now that I say that, it's going to be a shutout. And then if the Sounders have another shutout, he sets the franchise record for 14, right?
Yeah, you would. I mean, and 14 is only 2 shy of the MLS record, which is 16. And so I would imagine it's probably like a top 10 figure all time. I do think that Fry has a decent shout for it, not necessarily because he was the best goalkeeper this year, but I think there's a case to be made. If you look at his 5-year resume, I don't think anyone has been as consistent over the last 5 years as he's been. And I suppose you can make a case that if you're going to give it to him, why not? It's sort of the Casey Keller, how Casey Keller won in 2011, which it wasn't so much that his 2011 was so great. It was sort of like, now Casey Keller deserves to be MLS goalkeeper of the year at some point.
Yeah. Although the way that I kind of look at the Berkey situation in St. Louis probably isn't fair, but he's like their highest paid player.
Yes, that's true.
He came from a champion, like
Yeah.
he came from a Champions League team,
Yeah.
and he should be this good.
Yeah. I mean,
Whereas-
that's
Where Stephen Fry was like, he spent some of last year injured. He's 37, which is, I'm pretty sure, older than God. And like, it could potentially also be his last season, although it's probably not going to be. He's had a lot of setbacks. He commutes on a ferry.
that is that does deserve to be included. I guess I haven't watched this video, but he said he shared on his socials today a video of orcas swimming in front of the ferry, which is
I did
by
not see that
itself
either.
needs to be part of that conversation.
There are no orcas in St. Louis,
No, there certainly are not.
so I think it should be Stephen Fry.
Okay. All right. Newcomer of the year. I went with Georgios Giacomakis, the Atlanta striker, who on a, the thing that really stands out to me, there's actually another one that has some good candidates. What stood out to me, though, is he's got 0.79 goals per 90, which ranks as or non-penalty goals per 90, which is the best figure in MLS. He has 15 goals. Just a very good player. I think he's, this is exactly the kind of Garth Logaway signing that I'm sure the Sounders would have loved to have been able to make. But yeah, Edward Leuven is the other one who I think is going to get a lot of attention, maybe end up winning. He's the St. Louis City midfielder, but he missed a bunch of games. So that to me knocked him down a little bit.
Didn't Miami sign a guy?
Yeah, they did sign a few guys, in fact.
Yeah.
But I don't know and I suppose Messi's going to get, he might end up, the funniest thing, Messi probably will end up winning this. You're right. But he only had I think a goal and 2 assists in MLS play. It would be pretty hilarious if he went, you can make a broad case, but it's not on his MLS play.
No, it's not. I agree.
It's a little bit almost like he shouldn't have been allowed to be nominated, because any award he gets nominated for, he's going to get votes for that he doesn't deserve. But
hey, I agree. It's the Atlanta guy. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name because he's such a classic Garth signing.
Yeah.
And every time I watch Atlanta, I'm pretty impressed by his hold up play.
He's a good player.
Yeah, he's great. The one that I'm going to throw out there is that, and he's not going to win, so this is just a long shot, is Bossy with Houston. He is at the center of the Ben Olsen revolution in Houston.
Yeah.
And he's great. He's just fantastic. Probably not going to win. I'm pretty sure all of his goals are penalties.
He does have a lot of penalties. Yeah.
And he set the record at the beginning of the season with 4 or 5 straight or something like that.
Yeah, I think his first 5 MLS goals were all penalties, I think.
Yeah. But outside of his penalty taking ability, he's just great. He's a really kind of crafty French right winger type player. Very he's great. He's not going to win, but if I were voting, I would just pick him because I like.
On some level, I kind of feel like you have to have some of those in these things. You can't take it too seriously. I will say, I don't want to miss this chance. In my write-up on Giacomakis, I called him the Greek god of goals, which I hope I have coined. This is a very distant reference to Moneyball, where Kevin Youkilis was called the Greek god of walks, but Greek god of goals just rolls off the tongue. So I hope that sticks.
Hopefully that's kind of the peace treaty you and the city of Atlanta need.
Right, exactly. I give you this nickname.
Not only are you the reason why their entire club is successful, but
right, I give him this great nickname.
Yeah.
All right, young player of the year. So this was the award that used to be rookie of the year, and they got rid of the rookie of the year in part because so many players were signed as 16-year-olds or 17-year-olds and didn't really come into their own until they were 19 or 20, which was still younger than technical rookies. And so they replaced this award. The flip side to that change, though, is you get a player like Thiago Almada, who is eligible, who it doesn't seem like he should really be eligible. It feels like he's sort of a cheat, but he is eligible. I don't know how you don't pick him. He's an MVP. He's a legitimate MVP contender.
Yeah, I think the way you don't pick him is you just don't pick him.
I mean, I guess, but that just feels like if he's eligible for the award, he's 21 years old
and he costs a bunch of money, is probably going to be sold for a league record in the next year. Yeah, it's gotta be him. Plus he's like legitimately great. I like John Tolkien from
that's a good
New York
one.
Red Bulls.
Duncan McGuire also eligible for this award. He's a more classic. He would be the winner in a previous version of this reward.
But yeah, it's going to be the Atlanta guy. And if you don't like it, I don't know, hire a lawyer or something.
Yeah. All right. This is comeback player of the year. So in the past, this has oftentimes gone to a player who basically, because adversity is considered one of the areas that they can come back from, and adversity oftentimes is just not being good for a year or two. And so we've had some kind of silly winners of this one. And in this year, though, there were a bunch of legitimate cases for players who are coming back from injury. For me, though, João Paulo, top of the list. He had a great season. Really, if you look at outside of the goals and assists, his numbers line up almost perfectly with his previous contributions before his ACL injury last year.
I agree. I see the two Atlanta players on the list. They came back from like legitimate injuries.
Alan Polito also came back from injury. The Orlando got Janssen also came back from injury.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that one.
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, there's a lot of legit case. Like, I think this is actually a pretty competitive award this year.
I would do João Paulo, clear favorite. Alan Polito as kind of like a dark horse.
Yeah, I mean, I think Polito probably wins just because he's got all those goals things.
Yeah, and he just signed a new contract extension. So
yeah,
but Sporting Kansas City can miss the playoffs.
Yeah, I know.
And it's like there's such a clear case for João Paulo, CCL champions, tears his ACL.
Yeah,
miss playoffs. He's back.
They make the
pretty good Western Conference team for most of the year.
Yeah,
that's like
I agree.
Yeah, so you're not an idiot for that one.
So I'm not going to give out my winner for the Audi Goals Drive Progress Impact Award presented by MLS Works Award, because I'll be honest with you, I trust that all the nominees for this are legitimate. I just sort of like quickly read through all the bios though, and a lot of them felt like they aren't really going outside of their comfort zone to do these things. I voted for Brad Stuver because I felt like the stuff that he was doing in the community felt like legit, but I kind of feel like this is not an award that the media should be voting on. It feels like MLS Works should just name a winner of this.
How's the NFL do the Walter Payton Man of the Year award?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I don't think the media picks it.
Yeah, I don't think this should be a award that the media picks. It feels wrong. All right. So Coach of the Year, I went with Bradley Carnell. I think it's basically a 2-horse race. Although you could make a case for Wilfred Nancy, you might be able to you could probably make a pretty good case for Oscar Pareja, but I think it's likely coming down to Bradley Carnell, Pat Noonan. The narrative almost always is one of two things. It's the coach who has perceived to overachieve the most, or the coach who achieved at such a high level that you can't ignore their accomplishment. Noonan is obviously up on the second part. Bradley Carnell is on the first part, but I am legit. I think the more impressive achievement is winning the West as an expansion team with a roster that I still look at, and I'm still not impressed.
Yeah. I'm going to be annoying and say it should be Ben Olsen.
Oh, that's another good one. You're right. Ben Olsen would have been a good nominee too.
He did win a trophy this year, but it's also a trophy MLS pretends doesn't exist.
Yeah.
With the US Open Cup.
And doesn't really count in this.
Technically.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard to be, it's going to be the St. Louis guy.
Hard to beat that story.
Yeah. Even Pat Noonan feels a little weird because it's like, since he actually spent like a bunch of money on their roster.
And a lot of people did pick them to win the Supporters Shield at the beginning of the year. So it's not even like they had a very good season, but it's not like they.
Pat Noonan can be the guy if he set the points record, but they're not going to set the points record.
Right.
So he's not the guy. I just like that this list has like 3 guys on it that have already been fired.
Yeah, that's always fun.
So they should just give it to Adrian Heath.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so MVP, and then we'll do a best 11. But my MVP, it's funny. I fought with myself on this one. I ended up going with Luciano Acosta, and I don't love this. I don't love this choice. I'll be honest with you. I think he deserves it. He's essentially the best player on the best team, and no other. I didn't have any other FC Cincinnati players in my on my award ballot, and so I kind of felt like he needed to be there as a representative of FC Cincinnati. He has good numbers. He has a bunch of penalties though, which kind of takes away from his goals and assist numbers are inflated by both penalties and secondary assists a little bit. But he did come up big when Cincinnati needed him most. I think he's legitimately their most important player. So I'm at peace with it, but I think there's a really good case to be made for several other players if you would like to make it, or I can tell you who else I considered.
No, I think that's a really good pick. The reason why I think it's a really good pick is since he also sold Brenner in the summer.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And brought in a new DP striker that Acosta had to quickly strike up chemistry with.
Yeah.
And that's what you want from your kind of playmaking guy.
Yeah.
I'm just always so impressed by Hani Mukhtar every time I see him play. I thought he was great against the Sounders, even though they didn't score.
He's also asked to do more than anyone else. I think is on this list, which I think is an interesting element of it. I don't think he's going to win, but I think there's a case to be made for him. Ryan Gauld, another one who I really liked on paper. The thing I like really about him is 11 goals, 12 assists. All 12 assists are primary assists, which I'm a sucker for.
Because they're real assists.
Because they're real assists, exactly. Honestly, Dennis Bwanga, I think
the last one I was going to bring
has a pretty good case to be made, especially if you expand it beyond just his MLS resume. He's going to end up the season with 32 goals and 14 assists across all competitions. That's a lot,
and not like a crazy amount of minutes either.
Right.
His per 90 stats are just mind-boggling.
I think he played 43 games, which is a lot, but not a crazy number. And but he came off the bench a fair amount. They actually did an okay job, I thought, managing his minutes.
he won that one game 42 minutes after he stepped off a plane or something crazy like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He's good.
The other one who I listed as someone who I gave some consideration to, and I think deserves some consideration, Hector Herrera. He was very good. I don't know that people really appreciate how good he was for the Dynamo.
Yeah. I mean, I've had to, for some reason, talk about the Dynamo in every category so far. So I might as well. Where I just think everything they've done this season is so impressive. It's really impressive that Ben Olsen, of all people, is playing some of the most exciting attacking soccer in MLS. Has such a complex and efficient press too, which those two types of things just make me really excited. But a midfielder that doesn't really score goals or assists is not going to win MVP.
But he's got 4 goals and 14 assists.
I did not realize he had that many assists.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few secondaries in there, and the other thing that really jumped out at me about Herrera was looking at the goal plus stat. So there's 6 categories basically that go into that make up the bulk of G plus, which is an American soccer analysis stat, and it essentially is sort of like the war, for lack of a better term, of soccer, right? And so it's trying to assess players' contributions in various parts of the game that don't necessarily get counted. And what was impressive about Herrera is that he is a positive influence in all 6 categories. And not barely in most of them. He's like a solid positive influence, and almost no one in the league does that. This is, and they're just in case you're curious, the categories are dribbling, fouling, interrupting, passing, receiving, and shooting. And he's a plus contributor everywhere, and I found that to be very compelling. But yeah, I mean, I guess we can go talk about best 11 too, because that is a decent transition, because G plus played a lot into my my thinking here. But we'll start with Roman. I don't know how you feel, but it's almost automatic. It is automatic, essentially, that the goalkeeper best 11 is the goalkeeper of the year. Although I remember 1 or 2 years I split my vote because I was being cute. But is there a compelling case to split it here, you think?
Compelling, no. But I think
But you would still vote for Fry.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think it'd be fun. I think that's how you get, because goalkeepers can't really do anything else.
I know.
So it's like you can be MVP, but you could also be in the best 11, or you could just like be a really good midfielder or something. But yeah, sure, why not? I'll pick Fry for goalkeeper of the year, and the St. Louis guy Berkey can be in my best 11.
There you go. I should also say, one of the things you have to do is pick a formation, and I ended up going with a 4-diamond-2 formation here. And I feel like my defense could my team could vaguely play. It's a little bisected as a 5-and-5 sort of situation, but not a lot of two-way players. But my defense is Rodriguez. He was my defender of the year. Steven Moreira, who the reason I like this one is that even though he plays center back for Columbus, he is tradition. He has been a right back in the past, so he could play right back.
They play a back 3 situation, so he's
on the right side of their.
He attacks more.
Okay,
I think right.
I think that probably makes sense. And then I went with Jackson Reagan as my other defender. I realized that even Sounders fans might find this a little controversial, but man, once you dig into G plus, it becomes very obvious that Reagan was the better of the Sounders center backs and their best defender, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he is. I think he's the Sounders' best defender, but I don't think that makes him one of the league's best defenders.
Well, he was okay. I'll make here. I will make my case, as it were.
Okay.
So he is the 4th best defender, fourth best center back by G plus, which I guess technically is not in the top 2. So I'm cheating a little bit. Moreira was one of the other ones. And then Janssen is the other one that jumped in there over him. But where he really excels is he was the 3rd best passing center back in the league, and he just wasn't negative in any category except interrupting, which admittedly is a pretty important defensive responsibility. But it was twice as good as, or it. I shouldn't say that. That's playing with numbers. He was significantly better on the interrupting scale, even though Yamar led the league in interceptions. Jackson was a better defender by that metric.
Yeah, but I think you got to pick the best defender on the best defense in the league, and that's Walker Zimmerman.
Yeah, I know.
Or Matt Miazga.
Right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think I probably homered this one.
Which is fine. You are well, like, you should do that. That's actually that's why it's really important. Local media votes on these things.
Exactly. You need some homer votes.
And I'm not patronizing you or anything.
No,
I'm just saying,
I take it that way. My left back, though, Alvaro Barrial, who honestly, like what's amazing about this, you very rarely feel compelled to pick a left back for your best 11 because left back is traditionally a position of weakness, especially in MLS. There were two outstanding, like absolutely by any metric, outstanding left backs this year: Kai Wagner, and an Alvaro Barreal. And either one of those, I think you can go like one of them better be on best 11 because they both were outstanding. Barreal had like 12 assists, I think.
Yeah,
and 5.
but he also he plays like way further forward.
He's a wing back, but he also he is a wing back, and apparently he's a converted 10, which I think is hilarious. But you know, it works for them.
Yeah, the other Cincinnati fullbacks really good too. Arias, or however you say his name.
Yeah.
I also think he's funny because he like really pissed Messi off in their game.
There you go.
I would personally pick Kai Wagner.
I don't think you can go wrong there. Yeah.
Who is a free agent?
Yes, he is.
So I'm just saying, Kai, welcome home. You'll love the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, we've long, deep German roots.
Yeah. You and Brian Smetzer can share German cuisine together. It'll be great.
Yeah.
I just think he's great. I know there's been this like weird, like there's this weird thing with him and Jim Curtin right now where he's not like a locked on starter.
What, really?
Yeah, and I'm solely basing this off of people I follow on Twitter that actually watch Union games. So it's like a weird game of telephone. But I guess every appearance he's had this year has been a start. Now that I look at it, maybe he gets subbed off early or something. I don't know. But he's good, so I'm gonna pick him.
Yeah, I can't argue with that logic. And then I did get a defensive midfielder on here. I think defensive midfielders are routinely snubbed in best 11. I think Hector Herrera is gonna make it. In part because of the numbers I shared earlier, but it would be a ridiculous thing if he doesn't get on best 11. He's just so good.
Also, the Cincinnati guy, Nwobu, or
I think that's right. Actually,
the Nigerian defensive midfielder they signed this year, he's great. I really like him, and he's had a great season. Like, he is really good.
I've heard a lot of people calling for this year, and I do think it would make sense to have a second team best 11, which basically is how it is in every other American sport.
Yeah.
It seems like that would be a no-brainer here.
And it would be even more fun to have, like, so the NBA obviously has the first team All-NBA, second team, third team.
Yeah.
It would also be fun to have maybe like a third category in MLS where you like can't be a designated player. It's only
like a non-designated player award.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, so this is where I cheated big time, was in the rest of the midfield. I picked Almada, Acosta, and Gauld, which, look, you don't need to tell me that defense, that midfield is going to get run through. But I do think that all three are worthy picks, and I don't really have a problem putting them all in my best 11. Do you want to make a counter case for, like, I need wingers or something? I guess Barreal is sort of a winger,
and Gauld is effectively a winger, and they're a weird setup, kind of in the way that Christian Roldan was a winger in 2021 for us.
Yeah.
Or even now, frankly. It's hard to just like pick anybody else. Like, the Gauld is not having like a great season by his standards.
And his numbers are really inflated by penalties too.
Yeah, and Mukhtar's doesn't really have a position.
Yeah, Mukhtar would be I would say the big snub here. Who, he's a fringe MVP candidate, but you got to make some sacrifices when you're putting together a
facility. And I think if you needed to pick a like non-attacking midfielder, the guy on the Galaxy that came from Barcelona, what's his name?
Oh,
Puig. Yeah. Puig was the baseball player.
Yeah.
He's like
his numbers are all very good. But to me, where he falls off is A, the Galaxy suck, and B, he missed a bunch of games down the stretch, and so I just don't feel as compelled to give him the award. Although I could see him getting into this team. I would be a little bummed if he made it though.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and then my two forwards, this is another one that might be a little, because I went a little bit against my own rules here. I picked Cucho Hernandez over Brian White, even though a lot of the underlying numbers say Brian White has been the best number 9 this year. But where Cucho Hernandez really shone for me is not only does he have a bunch of goals, but he's got like 11 assists too. And you just don't see that from, a lot of forwards. And then Bouanga I think has to be on this best 11, but yeah, Cucho and Bouanga are my forwards.
I'm surprised he didn't make a more compelling case for your Greek god of goals.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just think when you really compare their numbers, though, Cucho's just end up blowing him out of the water.
Yep.
Because for as good of a goal scorer as the Greek god of goals is, he is not really much of a he is kind of one dimensional in that. I mean, he's a decent hold up, but he's not setting up assists or anything. Whereas Cucho is very involved in the buildup.
I'm with you.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else you want to add to this? I don't know. We went covered a lot of ground.
I'm gonna be honest with you. It's been probably the most difficult year to follow other teams in MLS because there's 29 of them.
There are 29 of them, and they're all the games are on at the same time. I will say that I absolutely love the 360 product. I think it is by far the best addition to MLS broadcasts ever. But the reality of it is that it's both the blessing and curse of the Apple deal, which is the fact that it makes it possible to have this like all the games kicking off around the same time is what makes 360 a good product, but it's also what makes following the league as a whole harder because all the games are essentially going on at the same time. And I don't necessarily have a good solution. I do hope they do a better job next year of at least doing like picking different, like one game in different time slots. Like you can have a game on Saturday. Every week there should be a Saturday afternoon game. Every week there should be like 2 Sunday games. And you can still have,
especially in like the summer where there's like not a lot of other sports going on.
Yeah, exactly.
But
I'm with you. I think I watched probably fewer full MLS games this year outside of the Sounders than I've ever watched. I watched a lot of 360, but very rarely did I sit there and watch a game from end.
Yeah, and 360, I feel this way about basically any of the similar
Red Zone-esque products.
Yeah. Where I don't really get like the vibe of what's happening in a game. Like I remember a situation where I was watching 360 the night that DC United beat Red Bulls like 5-3 or something like that, which it's like classic MLS rivalry, 8 goals in a game. I think there was also crazy weather going on.
There was, yeah.
And they just didn't really like tap in to that. Like,
yeah, I would say that's fair. That's fair.
And I think that's mostly because the like vibe of the show is very like driven for a certain personality on the show, and I don't think that particular person is that enthralling of a personality, and I wish it was better. You either got to have like Red Zone where it's one guy sitting there for 7 hours talking about everything,
yeah,
or it has to be less of a podcast where because like even last week they brought I was watching it before the Sounders game and they just had like Carlos Ruiz randomly on set talking about his book, and it was like I care about Carlos Ruiz because he's like a historic figure in our league. He was a great player. He's got a crazy story, apparently, that I didn't know. I learned about it. But I don't want that from my highlight show, you know?
Yeah, I think that there's some definite improvements that can be made on the 360 product. I just think all the ingredients are there for it to be
I agree.
so good.
It needs a little bit more salt and needs to simmer for 5 more minutes, but it's
yeah.
I just didn't feel it. Like that DC United one really sticks out in my mind because it's like total chaos and it just wasn't really captured on their end. But I've probably criticized Apple TV enough this year that I need to maybe say some nicer things. So
yeah, well, that's okay. All right, well, that's a good place to call this a segment. I will give a plug real quick we had a cool thing happen on the Sounder at Heart Discord today. I asked Matt Doyle, as you probably know, is the armchair analyst, and he did an AMA on our Discord today. He hung out for like an hour and a half, answered dozens of questions, and it was a really cool feature. And it was something that hopefully if you're listening to this, hopefully you're aware that we have a Discord. Hopefully you're also aware that you can get access to the Discord by becoming a Sounder at Heart subscriber at the supporter or above level. And hopefully we're going to keep doing these kinds of things. It's a fun little thing to do. He said some very nice things about Sounder at Heart as well. And I hope if you have access to the Discord and you weren't there, it's still there. You can read all his answers, and I think it's probably worth going back and doing. But I'll just sort of also remind everyone that we're able to do this because of the overwhelming support that we're getting from listeners like you and readers like you. This has been a really awesome experience going independent, and hopefully we keep this going because, as much progress as we made, we still are not at a fully sustainable level, but we're getting there. We're getting really close to being there, and hopefully we can just keep growing this thing and getting bigger and better and having a lot of fun. I'll also give a big shout out to our sponsors, Full Pull Wines and Watson's Counter. That said, I'm Jeremiah Oshan, signing off for Mark Kastner and our producer, Lickett. This is Nos Odietes. Remember, you'll never be out alone.
We love you. Let's win another one.